Welcome to I Play, Therefore I Am. In our conversations with extraordinary games industry professionals, we discover their unique career stories, and we also find out about their personal development and philosophical journeys.
This podcast is a co-production of MediaNet, Berlin-Brandenburg, and Now Media, and brought to you fresh from the games capital Berlin, as part of the program MediaNet Games International.
I'm Simon.
I'm Florian, and we will be your hosts for this program.
Gaming meets philosophy. I play, therefore I am.
Hello and welcome to another episode of I Play, Therefore I Am. With me, as always, is my co-host Simon. Hi, Simon.
Hello, good evening, and also good morning to LA.
This is, of course, Florian, and our guest today is Celia Hodent, who holds a PhD in psychology and is an expert in the UX field.
Hi, everyone.
Oh.
Sorry. You didn't expect me to jump on it. A great way to start the podcast. I'm cutting you off. That's awesome.
Yes, and we will leave it exactly like this, where she has been working as a veteran of the games industry for over 15 years. She's worked for the likes of Ubisoft, LucasArts, and Epic Games. Projects like Fortnite, Rainbow Six franchise, and an unreleased Star Wars title. She's also the founder of the Game UX Summit and advisor for the GTC UX Summit. Additionally, she is a published author of the book The Gamer's Brain: How Neuroscience and UX Can Impact Video Game Design. And last but not least, she was recommended to us by our previous guest, Kate Edwards, and so we are happy to have her on for this episode. Celia, how are you doing?
Good. I'm sorry for earlier. Just cutting you off like this. Oh, rude of me. I'm good. I'm doing well. It's early morning in Los Angeles, and I'm happy to finally found the time to chat with you. I'm very excited.
Yes, so are we. So yeah, this means early in the morning for you, a little bit later in the day for us. But we're excited to have you on as well. And yeah, let's get on with things. So as I mentioned, you work in the field of psychology and UX. And to somebody who has no idea about these topics, they might ask, how does that lead to games?
Yeah, it's a good question. So people who play games, and everyone, we have a brain. And this brain is fascinating because it's allowing us to do fantastic things, but it's also extremely biased and limited. And my field in psychology is cognitive psychology. So it's the study of mental processes, such as attention, memory, language, understanding all these skills that we have and how they shape and what are their characteristics. And so my job is to explain this to the game developers so that what they're trying to accomplish with their game is what the players will experience in the end. Because it's really difficult to keep in mind and anticipate the brain limitations that we all have, and therefore our players are going to have. And because we're all biased, we have a hard time understanding that our perception of the game we're making is going to be different from the perception that the players are going to have. And so we are constantly doing this exercise of shifting from our own perspective, from what we understand the game is about and what our hopes and dreams for the game, and what, in effect, the players are experiencing and feeling as they play the game in development. And so by understanding those limitations of the brain, because the experiencing a game is happening in people's minds, this is really helping us finding issues early on, and so that we can fix it and offer the experience that we want to offer to players, hopefully. So I hope it was clear. This is what I do, is just like helping people, ensuring that the game that they're making, what they think they're making, is what players are actually experiencing.
Yeah, that sounds really good, because it's always a very big, between the idea haver and the executor and the customer, there are like many valleys to be
and also
close.
because when we're making a game, we're so into our game and we know our game so well that sometimes we don't even understand that players can be confused about certain things, or it's like when you're making a joke and you're the only one laughing and you don't understand why the other people didn't get your joke.
Would
Well, that's
never happen to me, by
yeah,
the way.
it never happens to you.
Never, never.
So that's the idea, is just to making sure, like, it's like, double checking, to ensure that what you find funny or what you're gonna find thrilling or exciting or scary if you're making a horror movie of a horror game, sorry, is really what people are gonna experience.
Absolutely. And to get a better idea of the conversation, or a good frame for the conversation we're about to have, I'm very curious. What's your personal original motivation? What was there first, games or psychology? How did you get into either? Would you entertain us with a little bit of motivation and backstory, your
Sure,
lore?
I can try, but it's actually not clear cut. It's not as if, my whole childhood, I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to be a PhD in psychology working in games. It really happened a little bit, not by accident, but with a lot of serendipity. I grew up with games. I grew up in the 80s, and my parents were a lot into technology and video games, and were a lot into games in general. So I play, like, my childhood is all about playing games, board games, make believe games, and video games. And so I grew up with those games, and I've, fond memories of a lot of different games on very old consoles like the Intellivision. I feel very old now. Thank you very much.
An,
No
an
problem.
old but also new console, depending on who you ask.
It's okay. Yes.
The Intellivision, I mean.
I like how you think. So that's the background. Games were really central in my childhood and in my family. And as I grew up, I was super interested into understanding humans. They're so weird things, like those creatures doing amazing things, like going to the moon, but also capable of the harshest horrors in the world. And so that what led me to psychology and cognitive psychology, and understanding how we develop skills and why are we making decisions that are actually not good for us, and I'm trying to understand all that. So that got me to my PhD. And after my PhD, I did not want to stay in academia for various reasons. Like, especially in France, it's back in the day, it was very dusty and very political. And I love, science for the sake of science, not for political games. And so that led me to go outside the academia and try to see what could I do with a PhD in psychology, and specialty in cognitive science and developmental psychology. This is where I started to work at VTech, helping them making educational games, and educational with quote unquote, because a lot of people just say that games are going to be educational just because you have ABCs and 1, 2, 3s in the games, but it's not enough to call them educational. But this was my first introduction to the private sector and trying to apply my academic knowledge in there. And at some point, it's just I had a light bulb. Was like, maybe I can work in the game industry, because there's a lot of interesting things happening in video games. There was some research looking at how games can be beneficial for education or for eliciting certain cognitive skills. And also some research for people concerned about violence. Back in the day, it was mostly violence in games. So I started to look into that, and I was like, yeah, that's, it fit everything. Like, my background in psychology, my childhood filled with games, including video games. But also, I love art, and I love to work in creative sectors. And video games is all of that. It's technology, science, creativity, art. So that's how it happened. I started to write articles on games, and to talk about games to parents so that they can help them not freak out about games. And that was in early 2000, so it was already a thing that parents were freaking out about. And I ended up, trying to find a job in the game industry, and this is how I got at Ubisoft in Paris
Yeah.
the first time. So a lot of serendipity it's not like it's just weird how these things happen because it's a lot because I was curious about certain things and listen to the research and look at what I could do with my integrated technology. So yeah, life is chaotic like this.
Yeah, I mean, our podcast is a podcast that is very open towards the people who take interesting paths. I mean, that's mostly what the podcast is about, and those people. So that fits right in with the idea of this podcast.
Perfect.
So you described a bit of what you do, and we already mentioned UX quite a few times. And so if I personally talk to many game developers, they are looking for jobs or they are looking to hire people, then they have this idea of, oh yes, we will hire somebody for UX, UI, da, 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 da. And it always like UX, UI in this case, but also with apps, with many things, people throw this around as like some interchangeable or like it always belongs together kind of terms. But let's assume we are dummies, and in many ways we are. But for this specific case,
Yeah.
can you please tell us the difference between UX and UI and why they often come together and how that impacts your work and what you do with that?
Absolutely. So UX is a term that was popularized by Don Norman. And initially, we were talking about human factor psychology and we're talking about interaction design and stuff like that, just for a little history. The reason why
And
Don
just real quick,
Norman.
UX means user experience, right?
Yes,
okay.
absolutely. And the reason why Don Norman used that term is because he wanted to ensure that the whole experience of a user would be taken into account. And the whole experience is not just the experience you're going to have with a product. So we'll think UX was really a pioneer, champion by Apple. Don Norman was VP at Apple. So if you think about the experience that someone's going to have with a product, you're only going to look at how people interact with the product, let's say a computer, a laptop, or a phone, your smartphone. And how they understand how it's going to be used and what feelings and emotions they have as they interact with it. But if you consider the whole user experience, you have to consider also how people learn about this new product. So it's considering advertisement, it's considering marketing of the product, but also how they buy it. So if you think about the experience you have at the Apple Store, it's a very specific experience that you don't have in another store. But also how you unpack your product. So Apple is very famous for having a great experience as you unpack your product and you open your computer and the laptop says hello to you in all these different languages. Like all of this is thinking about the experience for the users, so the people are going to use the product all throughout the journey. So not just as we interact with the product, but before we get the product and all the way if we have a problem and we have to contact customer service. All of that is part of the user experience. So it's extremely broad. It's about considering like all the decisions that we're making, marketing decisions, product development decisions, customer service decisions, engineering decisions, all of this, but from the perspective of the user and what would be the best decisions for the user so that we can offer them the best experience possible given our constraints, because of course we have business constraints, we have a specific budget, a specific timeline, we cannot do everything that we want, and the product has to be profitable. So we consider all that so that we can offer the best experience possible to users for all throughout the ecosystem, like with the product and the whole ecosystem of the product. That is what user experience is about. So when you think about UI, of course, understanding the UI and experiencing the interface on a product is part of the user experience. But we have to understand it's a tiny part of the user experience. Now, depending on the product, when you're looking at websites, nearly entirely of most of the experience is going through the UI. websites. And so that's why UX/UI design has been a little bit mixed together, because on certain products it has a lot to do with UI, and in some cases, and there's a lot of games that are heavy in terms of UI. If you look at RPGs or 4X games, or strategy games, they're very heavy in the UI. They use a lot of UI. So of course we're gonna have to work on this, and interaction design and information architecture, all that. But we have to understand that UX is much broader than that.
Yeah.
So does that help a little bit?
That helps a lot.
Yeah, helps a lot. Super interesting. I feel like I was a dummy, but I am no more. This is good.
Just like
A
this.
very,
How simple it
very,
was.
very thoughtful explanation. And I would like to give you a little, build you a little jumping board to get maybe into the thick of your topics in the following way. So I've worked a lot on a personal project that's supposed to be a movie one day. It's sleeping a bit right now, but it's called Purpose of Gaming, because I think it's unbelievably, like literally, I can barely believe that it doesn't seem to be so well told yet, that story of what people actually get from games, psychologically, for their personal lives, what the actual purpose of games and gaming. And you are one of those people who is a gamer's gamer, literally raised on games, which I think is really wonderful. And so I think you know about this. Plus you have the academic and practical background. And so I'd really like you to give us a little, your opinion and your view on what the psychology of games is, what the purpose of games is, of games, and specifically video gaming, of course. Do I have anything else to add? I think that's it. I'm very curious how you see that.
Okay, I think I'm gonna do even better than giving you my opinion. I'm gonna give you the research on this topic. I actually wrote a book called The Psychology of Video Games, and it's going through the research on video games and looking into what are the potential benefits from playing games, and potential harms of playing games. And yeah, there's a lot of benefits, but it's not the panacea that some people would want video games to be, but it's still interesting. First of all, I just want to make something super clear. We know, as all the researchers in developmental psychology know, that play is the leading way of development for children. Children absolutely need to play. They actually have a right to play. And video games is just a way for children to play. So just by the mere fact that when you play a video game, you play, can be beneficial to you. Now, the beauty of video games is that you have immediate feedback on what you're doing. So it's allowing you to experiment a lot of things that you might not be able to experience in real life. Think about how you experience space in a game like Portal, when you like open portals and you have to, understand different perspectives and solve puzzles doing this. Or you manipulate time in a game like Braid, and so I'm getting old now, but you have games like this where you have to manipulate time to solve puzzles. And games, or like if you think about Kerbal Space Program, you manipulate physics and try to ship your spaceship in orbit and try to make it work. And so video games are, like certain games, of course, not all video games are allowing you to do this, but they can potentially let you experiment with a lot of things, manipulate things, do trial and error, and learn from it, and fail and recover. And that's one of the things that video games are really powerful for, because they give you immediate feedback, and they are patient. You can start again and retry to make sure you can succeed. And this is very important to learn. We learn through making errors and understanding our errors, and recover and keep going. And so games can potentially elicit that sort of growth mindset that is really important for children to grow, and also to stay sharp.
Very quick comment, if I
Yeah.
may. In my project, we've called it benevolent taskmaster, just as a side comment. I'm curious what you think about that, or because for me that's like this exactly the patient and step by step, the person that keeps you in flow state, or the instance that keeps you sort of in a flow state.
Yeah. No, exactly. And the flow state is even like, we could talk about this, but it's another layer and the cool cake that video games can offer. So there's this, and then depending on the video game, there's a lot of things that can be beneficial. Of course, now that video games are multiplayer and online, it's a great way to socialize. And in fact, during the pandemic, it was nearly one of the only ways that we could still socialize and have a space to hang out and play and be goofy together. So just by the fact that, it's very central in what we do today, and kids, we know that there's less physical space outside for kids to meet. We know there's less parks and less areas for kids to be goofy and do their stuff. Today, a lot of kids are gonna meet online and do stuff online, and video games are a big part of that. So as you can see, they can elicit cognitive skills, social skills, and so they're super interesting and certainly have to be considered as part of what makes play so rich for humans and growth. So there's all that to take into account. And lastly, there's a lot of educators today that are using certain video games like Minecraft to teach certain things to kids. And so far, there's a lot of great feedback on that. And it's showing that it's increasing engagement and kids are happy to experiment with this. So this requires an educator because, education has a lot to do with human interaction. So it's also a bit of a fallacy to think that just playing a video game by yourself, you're going to learn so many things. In many cases, you still need a person, a human that's going to be there to help you understand what's going on and grow by using those games. But it's promising. And so games are interesting like this. And on a personal level, it's a great way to connect with your parents, or your friends and your family members, just by experiencing a game. And yeah, it's just, I have so many fun memories of just playing games with your parents. And when you're a kid, it's also really cool to play a game with your parents because you're likely to be able to be better than them. And this is one of the few areas in life where you can outsmart your parents when you're a kid. And so it's extremely satisfying for kids to show, their parents are, more skilled they are at building super quickly or doing stuff, and being super good at platforming games. So yeah, see, there's a lot of benefits of video games.
Yeah. I have two follow-up questions. If you can feel free to sequence them. One curious question I have. Well, let's do it this way around. Regarding playing with parents, I think that's where my benevolent taskmaster meme comes from, because I was one of the kids that loved video games, but I had sort of an opposing relationship with my parents, or my mom specifically. But I didn't have a dad around so much, or not at all, basically. And so there was sort of, that's where this taskmaster meme comes from. There's this kind of somebody who is like, hey, kid, let's do this, And so I'm curious what do you think about that? And as a second question, might be related, I have this huge theory of hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, realizing a personal myth as a huge purpose of gaming, as a huge factor of being able to play an RPG. And there's always the weakling to hero thing. Like there's always this developmental factor. Maybe these things have something to do with each other. Curious what your take is on that.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm not going to comment on your personal situation. It's much too personal for me to comment on. But yeah, it's for you to figure out, what you do think that means and how did it shape you and how you express this today. But for sure, it can be difficult for that. That's why stigmatizing games today is is a problem because it's creating some confrontation between parents and kids. And yes, parents have to be aware of what their kids are doing, and video games are not just the panacea. There are problems, potential problems with games, so they have to be aware of that, definitely. But it's going to be a much better conversation if parents play video games with their kids and understand what they're playing, what modes they're playing, what they're accomplishing in games, and recognize what they accomplish in games and praise them for what they do in the games, just like they would do if their kids were playing a sports game, whether it is soccer or whatever, like the kid is into. The parents will participate in that and watch the match and praise the kid for their accomplishments. And oftentimes this is not happening with what kids are doing in video games. And so that could be beneficial to have a better understanding of why kids are so much into games and what they're accomplishing in games, and to, of course, be cautious of around the negative potential of games, such as, if you don't sleep because you're playing too much, it's definitely not good for your brain. Or if you're meeting people online that have nefarious intentions, then that happens, of course. We have to be wary of that. But it's very important for parents to be able to understand what their kids are accomplishing. So that's the first thing. The second thing, you're mentioning Joseph Campbell. It's hard for me to weigh on this, but what I will say, I was going to use another scientific study that was conducted and looking at the kids that are most into games and can fall into pathological gaming are sometimes the kids who are not experiencing competence, autonomy, and relatedness in their real life. So competence, autonomy, relatedness are the three pillars of what we call intrinsic motivation. And this is a theory called the self-determination theory. It's very popular today to try to explain what is intrinsic motivation and why are we doing certain activities just for the pleasure of doing them, not to gain external rewards from this. We know that if we experience competence, so we feel that we're progressing, autonomy, we feel that we have agency and we can be the master of our destiny, and relatedness, we can have a meaningful cooperation relationship with other humans, is usually what makes us be interested into certain things. So if you think about school, if you are not competent at school because you're failing at school and you don't have great grades and your parents are not happy and the professors are not happy and you cannot find a way to make that better, you're not going to feel any competence in this area. But if you start playing an RPG, games are made in such a way that if you put efforts in there, it's very likely that you're going to progress. And therefore, games have this unique way to make people feel competence within the space, and they feel in control, feel much more in control of your destiny when you play a game than in real life. Because in real life, there's so many things you can control, and it's not just, sometimes we put a lot of efforts into doing something, you're not necessarily going to be successful. In games, chances are, if you work on it and you try again and you try harder, good chances that at some point you're going to overcome, the boss or the thing that you're trying to overcome. And so I'm not sure if it's entirely related to your hero comment, but in many ways,
100% it is.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So in many ways, games can make you feel that you're in control of your own destiny and feel all these things that you're not necessarily in control in your real life. And that's also, so that's great as escapism, but it can also, like, certain people fall into pathological gaming if in their life there's such a discrepancy between how much competence and control they feel in life versus games. And so this is one of the avenues that we can look into, and games can sometimes help people cope with what's happening in their life, but sometimes it's too much of an escapism, and it just feels much better in games, and so you fall in pathological gaming, which is absolutely not good, of course.
I really have to say, I was a little bit disappointed when you started off by saying that you won't comment on Simon's private situation, because I thought we finally had a guest on here who could professionally
I'm not a
way on this
therapist.
situation, but we'll have to ask somebody else.
Yeah, no, it's not my place to comment on Simon's childhood. But if Simon wants to share more, by any means, I'll listen. I'm a good
I'm
listener.
just joking and teasing Simon a little bit.
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
No, but what I actually wanted to say there is the pathology of gaming is something that caught my ear when you mentioned this, and specifically your last few sentences about this, because I think that is something that describes what many people feel towards games, like how they view it as a form of escape, but how it also can be a little bit too much. I believe you are probably aware of this, but there have been studies and findings about video game addiction. This is a topic that sort of like comes up if it's maybe some politician in some country is bored and doesn't have a crisis to deal with. So they will say, oh, yes, our children are all addicted to video games. And then it goes down a little bit. But what was the progress over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years in that field of understanding how much games become addictive, how other external factors lead into this, like why people play too much games? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So yes, of course, I'm I'm aware of that. The WHO, so the World Health Organization, is the first organization to recognize gaming disorder. But a lot of researchers disagree. So there's a lot of there's no consensus right now on a so-called gaming disorder. The DSM, which is the manual for mental disease, they do not recognize right now a gaming disorder or addiction. It's under the disorders that need further research. So right now they didn't weigh in on that. What they do recognize, though, in terms of addiction, of behavioral addiction, is gambling addiction.
Yes.
That's the only non-substance addiction that is recognized in the DSM. So you don't have sex addiction in the DSM or shopping addiction or none of these things, which means that if you can develop an addiction in these areas, it's not the area that is causing their addiction. It's other psychological problems and context, and you're gonna fall in one of these addictions. So it's a little bit complicated right now to say that video games can have specific elements that will create a specific addiction to it, and this is where the researchers do not agree. Now, this being said, we have in many games gambling-like mechanics, like loot boxes. And these are much closer to the gambling addiction that can be described in the DSM and is very prevalent today. There's a lot of researchers that are looking into this and are pinpointing clear harms from gambling-like mechanics, especially to minors, because minors do not have a completely mature brain. The last part of the brain to mature is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is helping you managing a lot of things, have a good executive control and better executive control of what's going on in your emotional life and making better decisions. So already as adults, it's not perfect as we can feel when we're binge watching a TV series or playing game until too late, even though we know that we're going to work tomorrow. It's not reasonable to do that. But children and teenagers have a much harder time because their prefrontal cortex is not mature. It's entirely mature at 25 years of age. So it's late. And that explains, partly why teenagers oftentimes are going to do dangerous things, or children, why they throw tantrums, because they have a hard time managing their emotions. So for this population, more specifically, gambling-like mechanics are hard to handle because it's harder for them to stop and throwing the dice again to try to earn something that is valuable within the game. So we know that this can probably definitely not helping. So it's hard to say, is this really creating an addiction? I'm not going to weigh on that, but it's definitely something that is not helping.
Yeah.
So that's one. Then for the rest, it's harder to tell. It's also not my place to weigh on this. But I'm listening to researchers. Some researchers are saying that certain mechanics are definitely forcing players to go back into the games, and that can create a sort of an addiction. Whereas again, listen to other specialists are going to say no, an addiction is never just created by the object. So even when we're talking about substance addiction, it's not because if you're sick and you're gonna get some opioids, you're not necessarily gonna get addicted to it, even though opioids are very addictive substance. So don't do that. I'm not saying you should do that. But it's addiction is not just the substance. So of course, some substances are much more addictive than others, which is the case of opioids or nicotine. It's a highly addictive substance. But it's also have to do with your personality and the context, what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
So if you have anxiety, depression, or if your parents are divorcing, or you're experiencing you're being bullied at school, all of that's going to weigh in the equation. And you're gonna more likely gonna fall into addiction, or I prefer to call it problematic or pathological gaming, because gaming helps you cope. But that being said, there are some specific mechanics in games, like gameplay lack mechanics, or games that are punishing disengagement. Like if you're not coming back, you're gonna miss out on an awesome reward, or
Mhm.
during the season you're not playing enough, you're never gonna get the highest reward, and so there's some mechanics that are encouraging players to come back, and this is definitely not helping. If
Yeah.
you're on the verge of, you're having problems in your life and trying to cope with that, all these different factors are gonna weigh in.
Yeah. And I think that's a very good point, actually, this gaming and gambling thing, because I mean, that has also been around for a while, but especially in Germany at the moment, we see a lot of discussion around this topic over the last year or two. And me working in an association for games companies as well, this often comes up also in talks with politicians and like in public discussions, also on the German-wide level. So you basically already said that there are gambling-like mechanics in the games. So this is an opinion question, and I'm curious what you will say, because you are involved with the science, basically. But there seems to be a very clear thing that the gambling companies are trying to cozy up towards
Mm,
becoming recognized as gaming, and so not to be the black sheep anymore.
yeah.
But then again, on the other side, the games associations and games policy people are trying to keep that far away. But to me, when I hear this discussion, it always feels like, well, we are sort of bringing that on ourselves because we are allowing these kind of things to happen in games that
Yeah.
are clearly gambling like. So for somebody to compare that, that's not so far fetched at all. And I think that's also, it's not only a problem of keeping out those bad gambling people, but it's also like, well, you have to do your own work and look into what you're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So back, yeah, I love how you say that, and I'm invested in science. I love that. But back into opinion land, I remember that time where game designers were in awe with Puzzle and Dragons, and
Yes.
Puzzle and Dragons is using gameplay like mechanics. I don't think anyone saw or perceived any harm in that, but also because Puzzle and Dragons were not a kids game,
Mm.
and there was all these adults and game designers and system designers that found the mechanic very interesting. But also because in RPG we're using randomness and random number generator RNG all the time. It's part of the gameplay, and it's there to serve gameplay. So this is where it can be difficult to find the line, because we use random rewards all the time in games.
Yeah.
It's like 95% of games use that. As soon as you throw dice or draw cards, you're using random rewards to players. Gambling is when this system or mechanic is used not to engage with the gameplay, but to engage with the monetization. So
Yes.
gambling is an example of that, because pay money to be able to draw again in the hopes of earning money. So it's a very clear example of that in gambling. Gambling like mechanics is loot boxes, or when you're gonna enter like a draw and you spend some currency, in-game currency, in the hopes of earning something. If you look at let's take the example of Mario Kart. Mario Kart is using that draw, like you are gonna hit the mystery box. You don't know what you're gonna get. Although if you're behind in the race, you're much more likely to get something better than if you're ahead in the race. But it's there to make the gameplay more interesting, to make sure like the race is not as clear, that sometimes someone is going to be in the back can win in the last minute. So it's really there to serve the gameplay. Whereas
Yes.
when you look at certain loot boxes, sure, you're going to be excited because you want a specific weapon or a specific football player, or soccer player. I could say football, actually, if you're in
we're in
Germany
Europe.
and Europe. I always get confused since I live in the US. Or certain skins or whatever. And yeah, we have to be clear. It's much more in terms of the game design and business model. It serves much more the business model.
Yeah.
And since we have free to play games, in fact, the business people are asking game designers to find ways to fit the business model into the design. And so this is how we end up with loot boxes in many games today.
I like how you named the good example, and so the Plumbers Association will not come after us for mentioning Mario in this example, but you did not mention the bad example, and we won't ever know which kind of games you were talking
No,
about.
I gave hints though. So those who know,
Those who know.
If you know,
That's
you
right.
know.
That's right.
If you know, you know. Yeah, it's. I mean, we do know
Yes.
the examples there,
Yes.
and there are in certain countries like Belgium where loot boxes are banned, and we're going to see more regulations around this. And this is one of the more clear cut regulations and guidelines that we can give to game developers. Like if you're targeting kids, if your game is for everyone, do not add loot boxes. This could be clear. Like for casino games, I agree that it's not, ethically speaking, it's not great, but casinos are allowed in our society. It's just not allowed to 18 to minors. So it's just a bit more complicated in the digital space because it's easier to pretend that you're of age when you're not. And we have to protect the kids, but if you're an adult. So the thing that we do in casinos is we help adults that are falling into gambling addiction to not go to casinos. They can make themselves be part of a list to not be allowed in casinos. We don't have, to my knowledge, we don't have such mechanisms in gambling games online.
No. Well,
So
in gambling specific, I think since sports betting also falls under gambling, you can, and I know a little bit about that because sometimes I dabble, that you can basically have limits and you can sort of set a check mark and write to them and say, hey, I don't want to spend more than amount X per month, or hey, please suspend my account and don't activate it even if I ask.
Yeah. Okay, so
At least
that. Is it enough? I don't know.
I'm also not sure. Just saying that it exists.
And I think that's a good time for you, Celia, to introduce to us, because your project scope has expanded and you're working on a new project, Ethical Games, and also a corresponding conference, which, well, what you call it, an initiative, an advocacy?
Yeah, it's an initiative. It's not an org or anything. But so actually, you mentioned Kate Edwards, the introduction. She's part of it with a bunch of people. We started to think about, what are, because sorry, I'm just backtracking a little bit.
Please.
we were really concerned about the moral panics that we were hearing all the time around games, violence, addiction, all these horrible things. And yes, there are moral panics that are, don't have any basis in evidence, but there are also concerns that are evidence based. And those concerns we need to address. And that was the idea behind ethical games, is to separate the moral panics from the genuine concerns that is backed up by scientific research. And gambling like mechanics is one of them, or extremism in online gaming, harassment, bullying, toxicity, all these things that are actually happening and we need to address. And the idea is to try to identify what we can address and how and what we make it the industry more ethical for players, so that we can address those concerns, but also educating on the moral panics so that we can be clear that we're not necessarily going to address panics that don't have any substance, scientifically speaking. And so that was the idea behind this. And it started in 2020 because, all of a sudden we had more time to think about these things. So we kicked that off. And so initially what we did is a draft of what a code of ethics could look like in the game industry, with two main perspectives. One is the perspective of the player, how we can better protect players, address the evidence-based concerns around gameplay-like mechanics, around disruptive behaviors, or also called sometimes toxicity in games, address things like inclusion, accessibility. Also, accessibility has made great progress in the past years, but there's still a lot of work to do. And also think about the player as a moral agent in a game, and what does that mean? Because of course, we can make games and address a lot of different topics, like sometimes violent topics, because humans can be very violent. But we have to think about what does that mean in terms of the player who is taking part in this world as a moral agent. So all these topics we were exploring, but also from the perspective of the video game worker, because it's going to be hard for the industry to protect players if we are not also capable of protecting ourselves. And it's hard to advocate for the player when your job is in the line and you don't know if you're going to be laid off tomorrow. So right now it's really difficult to have these conversations because of how the industry is. But we want to also make sure that the video game developers, the workers, can also be protected from also harassment that is happening on the social media, from crunch practices, from a lack of diversity and inclusion and accessibility in the industry. So that was the idea. And it's been an ongoing conversation for years now. And earlier this year, in January 2024, we did a ethical games conference, and that was inviting the researchers to present their research on several topics, to have the input from science, because we want it to be evidence-based. So this is where we're at, and we are kicking off like some forums, like online forums, to to ask the game industry actors, what do you think they can do in light of the regulations that are coming up, also around stuff like dark patterns, like using fear of missing out to encourage players to come back, stuff like this. So yeah, we're trying to move forward. It's not easy. It's a delicate topic.
Yeah,
We're hopeful that we can.
I just wanted to say, so you are one of those people who want to ruin our games, right?
Yeah, I know.
You want to bring the
With
politics
the
into the
woke mind
games.
virus. I know.
And, oh my God.
Yes.
But maybe
We should laugh about it now, because it's
no. I mean, it's
interesting.
it's serious. But a question, and this is then a serious question to my snarky comment. When people, and of course, that's why I also waited with this kind of question until we had a lot of time to hear what you were saying first. There is an ongoing discussion constantly about what should be put in games, how they should be perceived. You were speaking about
You mean
the
on
whole
social
user
media, right?
experience. Well, of course, on social media, but I mean, in society, I mean, whatever. So as somebody who works with this in a professional capacity, of course, this makes sense for you to discuss. but we have with all the problems and all the seriousness that games can deal with, gambling, addiction, whatever, in terms of ethics, there's always, and it might be true or not, I'm not like, I don't want to judge it, but there's always a stance of, hey, games are just for fun. So games is something that should be enjoyed. There shouldn't be anything in there that I don't like. And that is a very, very short description of this because I don't want to endorse the whole thing. But is there something like an over professionalization of games in a way? Do you know what I mean? Like as a not.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things in what you just said. So let me try to unravel a little bit. So first of all, yes, there's a lot of comments against stuff for fun. You're removing the fun of all my games, and this is happening on social media. I'm not entirely sure, but I would love to see some research on this. If this is a generalized sentiment, I think it's just a small vocal part of gamers that are like really spreading their discontent on social media.
Yes.
So that's one. Then you say, yeah, games have to be fun. That's exactly my point. We're doing this to make sure games are fun for everyone, not just a very small subcategory of people, and safe for everyone and accessible to everyone. It's exactly what we want to do. And third, games are already pretty diverse. A lot of like the LGBTQ plus community is fairly dynamic in the game industry, and artists are artists and they express what they want to express in the game industry, and this is already happening. And it's just like people, this discussion sometimes it reminds me of, I just talked about this yesterday on another discussion, but a lot of people are going to say, yeah, and using like images from The Matrix to talk about the woke mind virus and say, yeah, movies like The Matrix would be horrible if it was hit by the woke mind virus, without even them understanding. Yeah, no, I know this is happening right now on social media. That The Matrix was directed by two trans women, and it's talking about those topics, and people don't realize that this is what art is all about. It's to express different perspectives, push boundaries. Art has always been political, social, and yeah, video games are art. So guess what? This is what's going to happen in video games. But the beauty is that we can have a lot of different video games.
Exactly.
And everybody can play the games that they want to play, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to protect them.
Yes.
And so again, I'm not saying we should not have games with women that are over sexualized or games that address violence. I'm not saying we should not have these games. What I'm saying is that when we are using violence and sexuality, and we need to understand where it's coming from, what tropes there can be feeding, and what sort of discrimination it can be perpetuating, but also thinking about the moral agent, the player as a moral agent in these games. What different options do they have? Are there different choices they can make, or do they have, to win the game, do they have to be violent, or are there different options? Because that's interesting. It's different from a movie. When you watch the violence, if you watch a Quentin Tarantino movie, it's very violent, but you're not taking part in it. In a game, you're making choices and taking part in it, and there are games where there's no other choice, or not a lot of great choices without of you succeeding without being violent or get into that's like feeding that trope. So we can have a reflection on that, and we can also protect players against toxicity online, because I don't think anyone wants to feel unsafe as they play games, and I don't think anyone wants to feel that the game industry is trying to over monetize them. A lot of players are vocal actually against the monetization practices that we see today. And so, yeah, this is what we're trying to do, making sure that games can be fun for everyone. And it's not an easy topic, and that's why it's an ongoing discussion, so that we can find the right lines to identify where are the lines, so that we can tell when we're about to cross them. And I think it's important for us to own this discussion in the game industry rather than wait for regulations to decide for us.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's my point, but I'm happy to discuss.
No, and that's a point well taken, and I think that's a perfect last word. Open to discuss, as long as the discussion is done in a humane and friendly
Respectful
way.
Yes.
Yes.
And evidence-based. Again,
Yeah.
people have opinions, and it's normal. We're humans. We all have opinions. But when we make decisions like this that are important, like a code of ethics or regulations, it has to be evidence-based.
Mm.
Because otherwise, if we want to make the world a better place, we need evidence of how it works, because we're so biased. We can
Evidence
very
and
well make the
facts.
wrong decisions.
And I think also the attitude that if you go to ethicalgames.org, looking at the website as I speak, it's a very nicely simple website, and I can see that very far up, kind of. That means on a high priority point on this site, you make it clear that it's an open and living document, and I think that's always this. That's the spirit that heals the world is
Oh,
an
yes, beautifully said.
open conversation, and I can feel this in the way you talk. You're setting a frame. You're allowing a topic to emerge. You're pitching the tent, but you're not completely filling it. You're giving a suggestion, and you're inviting this topic into the world. And I think the sort of blessed furthering here is to, you are the, if I may say that to you, that you are the founder, but you're not the authority, right? You are a good steward, but you're not the, because
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
like,
absolutely,
I see
and
that.
thank you for that.
That's what I perceive in seeing this website and hearing you speak, that you would like to be the door that invites this in, but it's not on you to have the final word.
Yeah, I love that, and actually, I picture myself as as a bridge builder. There's a lot
Wonderful.
of much smarter and dedicated people who talked about ethics long time before I did, and so I'm just hopefully making their work more visible and bridging the scientific community with the video game industry, so that we can maybe move forward. Yeah, no, I don't have the solutions, but yeah, opening doors and making the conversation happen is already a thing. So I'm happy I can contribute to do that. But we'll see what happens. Maybe nothing's going to happen, but at least we can have conversations about it.
That's what we're here for. And
Yeah.
that's a great segue to our final game that we like to play, Essential Questions. Today, a bit of a tighter episode, coming in at an hour right now. And normally we talk for 2, but great, I think great what we covered. And we'd like to ask you some essential questions and see
Oh
what
boy.
comes up. And maybe we learn a bit more about you. And some things surely have been covered. Don't be afraid to repeat yourself a bit. It's a chance
Okay.
to essentialize some of the things we've talked about in a longer way. Are you ready?
I don't know if I'm ready, but I have to be. Go for it.
That's good. Let's begin. So the first question is always simple and easy. What is the purpose of your being?
My God. You find that an easy question? I don't know. Purpose of being is building bridges. Let's go with that. I love that. I love connecting people and facilitating and finding, the greatness out there, and try to help those people who are so dedicated to make the world a better place and build bridges. Yes, I love that.
Sounds good. The good old shamanic impulse. Very nice. The second question. What inspires you?
Sorry, I'm going to repeat myself, but dedicated people, like those people who, despite all the difficulties and pushbacks, who are fighting for their rights, and even like the people who are fighting for others, people's rights. It's so inspiring. I'm eternally grateful for the women who fought for women's rights, for all the Black people in the US who fought for civil rights, and everybody like raising awareness on discrimination and inequalities in society. the job that the work they're doing is incredibly valuable and difficult. And so this is what inspired me, but it's also very intimidating. It's just like, but yeah, it's this is truly inspiring.
Great. What is a beautiful day to you?
When I'm in nature outside and I'm discovering a place I've never been, that to me is really where I can let go of all of the stress about this crazy world. So yeah, being in nature, seeing animals or diving. This is the perfect day for me.
What is the change you want to see in the world?
How much time do you have?
This is a quick fire game. You can
Okay.
essentialize.
Equal rights for everyone and justice. That would be a good start.
Great. And of course, the obligatory follow-up is, how do you contribute to it?
Very poorly. This is stressing me out all the time. Yeah, it's a difficult question because I always ask myself, what can I do better? And I keep feeling that I'm not doing enough. But what I'm trying to do is trying to help the people around me, because I'm not a great politician. I'm not really good. Like, for me to tackle the ethical games thing is really hard, because I'm great at building bridges. I'm not great, at playing the political game and growing organizations, stuff like that. But I try to help the community around me, because even if it's not changing the world in the large scale, it can be changing, something from one person at one moment. And I'm trying to hang on to these little contributions and hoping that at some point I'm going to be good enough to make stronger contribution. But I think that's why I was saying it's intimidating earlier. That when you see all these great people like doing such amazing things, and we're like, what am I doing? But I think we should not be intimidated, and we should try to do little things. And at least if we can do little things and hoping to do better as we go, then all together we can make the world a better place. So, kindness and everyday little things, I think, can go a long way. Maybe, hopefully.
I would wager a rare addition to an answer from a guest, and encourage you and say, yes, I think so. And I believe there's wisdom in small things, as above, so below, as in the small, so in the big. The butterfly effect is real, magic is real, and magic is found in the smallest gaps and in the smallest things. So never despair and never surrender, and be kind also to yourself.
Yes.
The spirit of friendship and togetherness that you invoke is the thing that truly goes far. None of us truly go far alone.
Absolutely. Never give up, never surrender.
Indeed.
Amen.
With that said, if you would theoretically start a new save game in your life right now, what occupation would your new character have?
Like, you mean in a game or in life?
In life.
Well,
Oh, musician. Definitely
Great.
musician.
Wonderful.
It's one of the things that I hope I can revive at some point. Like, music is such a big part of my life. So
also changes the world all the time.
Exactly. It moves people in ways that other stuff are not moving people. So
Indeed. Last question from me before I give it over to the Florian. Do you have books that you often recommend or that changed your life? You're invited to give the top 3.
Yes. Okay, so the number 1 would be Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman. This book definitely changed my way of understanding how people think and reason. There are a lot of books that are been groundbreaking. I mean, depending on where I was in my life. Recently, books like Invisible Women was really eye-opening to me to understand the impact of bias in design. So the whole premise of the book is the world has been designed mostly by men, and it's affecting women in ways that they did not necessarily anticipate. And it's not because they were bad people, it's just because we're biased. And when you design without inclusion and diversity in mind, this is how you end up in those situations. So the whole idea of yeah, bias exists and this is always going to happen. And depending on who is designing the society for us, the bias is going to serve more of this community than others. That's always going to happen. So the idea is to think about those biases ahead of time to design in an inclusive way. So, and one of the recent ones I would say that was very opening is Weapons of Math Destruction. That was very interesting to understand, AI biases and how, again, those discrimination in design is only going to be perpetuated by AI and at a scale that's much greater and in such a way that it's hard for us to understand because AI is a black box. So yeah, these are the recent ones. My top three. Thinking Fast and Slow is it's an older one, but the two others that come to mind are more recent and really help my shaping my thought on the topic of inclusive design and how we can make the world a better place if we think about how we can design it more inclusively. Because it's
All
not
right.
just going to happen with hopes and dreams and well-intended people. It's we have to work on it. It's actually hard to make things inclusive.
All right.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
leaving
I
you with
mean,
oh my
what?
God, so much work to do ahead of us.
Good. Good.
So
good.
the next question is, what are your favorite games? Also a top three.
Oh my God, come on. It's just,
Mm,
this is
Notoriously
so
the
hard.
hardest question in this quiz. Yeah.
This is hard. Okay, give me a topic, like of all time in my childhood, or what? Give me like an angle because it's
of
just too hard.
all time.
Of all time? No, this is okay. Sorry, I should. I set myself up for this. Oh my God. Okay. And in the course of my life, there are key games. Let's
Yes.
say that. Okay, so World of Warcraft was one of them because
Mhm.
I played a lot of World of Warcraft back in the day when it came out. Zelda was also a big one. It was playing with my parents watching or just like swapping the controller. So that was a big one. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in television was a big one, and it enlightened me and then the importance of sound design because this game was heavily relying on sound design. It was really really fascinating, and I talk a lot about this game because it was a truly uh, interesting game and very deep with the little pixels that they had back in the day. More recently, I played a lot of Overwatch. I really had a lot of fun with this game. And then there are games like Myst, like the Myst series was also a big part in my life. Little Big Planet was one of those games also that I loved a lot. And some indie games, like especially Limbo and Inside, were really, really interesting to me. Hellblade was also super moving to me. So here we go. Just hard to say one game, but here's just a few examples of some of the key games in my life. Let's say that.
This is totally fine. We always leave an interpretation room and you interpreted it exactly how you needed to.
I feel
Uh,
like I'm analyzed now. I'm actually gonna lie down on my couch.
Yeah, you might not be a therapist, but you don't know what we are.
Oh God, I didn't see that coming. It's like Inception.
Inception podcast.
Armchair psychologist podcast. Yeah, that's right.
Question number 9. Who is somebody from the games industry who you would like to get to know?
That I don't already know. You're
Yes.
suggesting. I don't know. I'd like to know more Tim Schafer because of his background at LucasArts and well, these are the games I didn't mention, but like Monkey Island and
No
Days of the
trackbacks.
Tentacle and yeah, also at some point in my life were very interesting, but also of his interest in music. So yeah, I'd love to meet him. encoding him several times, but never get a chance to chat with him. So that would be cool. But there's a lot of other people that I'm not mentioning because I actually met them, and so if the question is someone that I haven't met yet, that would be
and I think it's completely fair to say, hey, I've encountered this person once or twice, but like I really want to sit down and get to know them. That's why the question is like.
But Brenda Romero would be a big other one. But I've met Brenda several times, and she's fantastic, and she's a true inspiration. And I was so happy when she wrote the forward in my book. So definitely, like Brenda Romero is super high. Glad I've met her several times. I would love to get to know her more. Definitely. So that would be the other one.
Yes, that's two good answers.
Okay, I think there are no good answers for this one. It's very personal.
Well, that's what we are aiming for, and it's your answer, so it's a good answer.
Okay.
Who is someone you know who you think we should have on this podcast?
Which is how you got here, by the way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so, but I don't know who you had already. I would definitely name people who are working on the ethical game stuff. I would have named Kate Edwards, but you just had her, so I can't can't escape with that. Let me think, because it's so this one I have to be a bit more thoughtful because there are a lot of people that I'm thinking of. But I would say, let's see. So either you can look into game UX communities or the ethics stuff. Oh my God, this one is difficult. I can only name one person.
I think you haven't answered any of the questions so far in the original premise, so you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Oh God. Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, so what I would suggest is can I just name everybody like who participated in the Game UX Summit, or
of course, if you can send us a list, we can publish it. Like in the show notes, like next 500 guests.
Okay, exactly. Well, get to know the people in the UX community. That would be great. So you have a bunch of people that are very vocal in the game UX community and animating this community. So I can definitely send you a list. But it's just hard for me to just name one person because I'm definitely gonna forget someone else, and then I'm gonna feel very bad. So it's really difficult for me to just name just a couple because there are so many people that are pushing the boundaries in our industry. So actually, I refuse to answer this question.
This is the first time, and we will not hold you.
I'll send you a whole list with a bunch of people, and then I don't want to be responsible of naming a few people and then say, oh shit, I didn't thought of that person, and then I'm going to feel very bad, and then don't want to do that because I want to build bridges.
Perfect.
And not and not have like transparent walls.
This is how we will remember you.
I'm not answering, but that's
perfect.
This is where my line is.
Walking the walk, on talking the talk. Very good.
With our penultimate question, we found your line. The last question, where can people find you? And that means people who want to know more about you online.
Yeah, that's an easy one. I'm on Blue Sky. So you can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me on LinkedIn. So yeah, that's super easy. I have my website, celiahodent.com, where there's a bunch of resources there. There's also resources for students who want to get in the game industry and UX roles. And I have a list of UI and UX communities that can join, and list of books and stuff. So I'm very easy to find online. But I'm not always replying to people because I'm very busy, but I try. So poke me on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. I guess these are the two social media that you can find me on more easily.
And we will leave the info in the
ethicalgames.org, ethicalgamesconference.org for your most recent project.
Absolutely.
All right. Celia, thank you very much for your time and joining us on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for your very hard questions sometimes. But yeah, it was a great conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's like the shadow episode here where we only talk about sick games we've played and what's cool about them, and that will take 2.5 hours, and we nerd out about.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is like a nominal World of Warcraft conversation in
Yes.
this podcast, and you guys didn't have it. Which,
Yeah, and that will be on the Patreon for $5 million that we are opening. the one and only Celia Hodent on Patreon, the first episode.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, thank you very much. Great talking to you, and great and humorous insight. Very,
We
very wonderful.
try. I think. I mean, the world is fucked up, so we need to to find some lighthearted ways to go through that shit.
That's right.
And with that,
That's right.
we are out of here.
Come on, I didn't swear until now. I had to. Like, people expecting me to swear, so it's my signature.
Very good.
Very good. Okay, thank you so much, Celia. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.